You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Naruto Enters Kung Fu Panda? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Karasu87 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Dreamscape. Naruto groaned as he sat up. He rubbed his sore forehead. What the hell? DMN Panther. What's with all of my senseis? Kakashi poked me in the butt. Arrow Sennin threw me off a cliff. A cliff. He continued to mumble to himself, and didn't notice that he wasn't in the temple anymore. He suddenly found himself tangled in a curtain. Quickly getting free of the object, he stared at the familiar symbol on it. His eyes suddenly went wide. Ichiraku. He slowly opened the curtain, only to see the place empty. He backed away from the restaurant and looked around. The village of Konoha. Was everything just a dream? He glanced to where he knew the Hokage mountain should be. And what he saw nearly made him faint from shock. The 5 Hokage head were now animal heads, with Tsunade being a leopard. Or was it a cougar? No, definitely leopard. She had spots. I so pictured her being a slug. He continued to explore the village, unaware of a glowing blue tendril rising from the ground. In the distance, he spotted his apartment. But instead of walking to it, he turned away from him. He had a new home now. A family and friends. Sure, he had many back in Konoha. But the village of Yang felt more like home than years of being in Konoha. Back in Konoha, he felt a weight of needing to prove something. But back in his new home, he felt he can choose and be whatever he wanted. He continued to walk the empty streets. He passed by plenty of familiar places. Like the Yamanaka flower shop, the Forest of Death, the Academy, and the Hokage Tower. He even stopped at the place he fought the masked kunoichi, Tsukino. I miss my sister, Suki-chan. Hope she is doing good. He finally reached the training ground, and spotted the familiar memorial stone. He gave a faint smile as he saw the 3 training logs. As he headed for the memorial stone, he decided to call his parents. Mom. Dad. After a few seconds of no response, he decided to read the names. Using a claw, he traced some of the names, but then his eyes grew wide as he read the last name. Uzumaki Naruto, Kia, but the K had been crudely scratched out and was replaced with an M. He ran a paw over his name with a sad smile. His ears twitched as a noise was heard directly behind him, but before he could react, a glowing blue tendril wrapped around his neck. He was lifted up. His paws clawed at the object. He tried to look for the origin, but only saw the tendril coming out of the ground. And like a slingshot, he was slung backwards and into a training post. The same post he was tied to as a genin. The top half broke off and landed on the ground. Coughing from the sudden attack, he got up and looked at the attacker. Only to come face to face with himself. A blue glow surrounded the doppelganger, along with yellow eyes. The mirror image of him unsheathed his claws as he threw both fists down. What is this? Naruto asked, but was forced to dodge to his left as an air bullet collided with the training post and reduced it to splinters. The creature smiled with his fangs visible. What's wrong, fox got your tongue? The creature chuckled as it circled around Naruto like a predator circling its prey. Kyubi. Naruto whispered from his place on the ground. Wrong. The clone gave an insane chuckle. Then who? Naruto stood up. But before he could get in a stance, a sudden pressure pushed down on him. He dropped to his knees. Ah! I can't move. I haven't felt like this, since Zabuza. Ah, yes. That's where I learned Ki from. The figure tilted his head as the Ki was lifted. But you asked who I am. Yes. Naruto stood up with a breathe. Now, quit dodging the question. I am. The figure popped his neck, and flexed his claws. Naruto held in a breath. Your fear. What? Naruto asked. He stared in shock. The first thing he could think of, was that this was Yami. But, he was in a new life. Everything, Kyuubi and Yami related were gone. Your fear. Your loneliness. Your desperation. Your hopes. Your dreams. Your anger. A tentacle slipped out from the creature's sleeves. And like a WHP, it launched forward and impaled a tree. I am everything you are. The embodiment of your chi, the tentacle retracted. You just going to throw your old life away? Everyone that meant something? He smirked. I should just kill you now. Naruto rolled to the side just as a tentacle impaled the ground. All of those bonds we worked so strong to build. And yet, you destroyed them. Naruto grunted as he stood back up. I didn't dash. Before he could finish, a tentacle struck him and he flew to the side. He crashed into a building. A building that was next to Yamanaka flower shop. A testament to how far he flew. Getting out of the rubble, he spat out a glob of BLD. He looked at the BLD in shock. You must face your past, in order to survive the future. Naruto blinked as the image of his MSTR came and faded quickly. He wiped the BLD from his muzzle and stood up. If you want my power. He looked to his left, and saw the clone leaning against a building. Overcome me. The clone vanished in a poof of smoke. Naruto carefully looked around to make sure that creature doesn't get in a surprise hit. But before anything could happen, Konoha began to fade. He blinked and the location was replaced by a new one. A very familiar one. Naruto gasped as a familiar fog covered the area. He sniffed the air. It smelled salty and slightly fishy. He could tell there was a lot of salt water nearby. Remember this place. The clone's voice was heard echoing throughout the dense fog. This is, where I first met Haku, my first true bond. Naruto replied. He remembered seeing Zabuza and Kakashi in an awe-inspiring fight. Then, Haku appeared dressed as a Kiri hunter nin. Glad you remembered. A large sword pierced through the fog, and narrowly missed Naruto's head. Naruto jumped back as the sword sliced again, and nearly took his head off. And it kept repeating like that, with the sword missing him by inches. There are 8 points. Larynx, jugular. The sword suddenly stopped just as it neared Naruto's neck. DMN. I forgot how the rest went. The sword was swung again, but this time, it managed to clip Naruto's arm. Naruto backed away. His tail swung angrily behind him. He held his bleeding right arm. A whoosh was heard. He closed his eyes as he felt a shift in the air near his neck. When a person has something important they want to protect, that's when they can become truly strong. Haku's voice echoed through his head. Images of Haku flooded his mind, including when he was resurrected by Kabuto. His eyes snapped open. He ignored the sword which was moving in slow motion. He looked towards where some of the sky was visible through the fog. Haku's face appeared. Embrace your bonds, Naruto-kun. Prove to him that bonds never truly die. Naruto inhaled as the sword picked up speed. And despite the pain in his arm, he leapt to the side. The large sword scraped the ground. He glanced to where the sword came from, and saw an opening. He leapt over the sword and kicked. He struck the clone with all of his might. But as the kick impacted, the world exploded into particles. He looked around, and saw that Konoha was reappearing around him. The training log was still in pieces. He felt a tingle on his arm, and he spotted the skin and fur mending back together. A cough was heard next to him. He frowned as he saw the clone. Said clone was leaning against a tree, panting. After a beat, the clone growled in anger. "Quit pretending." The clone yelled. "I looked through your mind. Our mind. And not once have you thought about Haku. Or the rest of your friends. Sure, you talked about them, but that's it. That's not true. They will forever be in my heart." Naruto yelled. He felt a lot stronger. Our heart. It is possible to move on, without breaking a single bond. The clone growled, then rushed forward. His claws were at the ready. But before he could reach Naruto, a white light flashed. The clone blinked in shock as more than 100 ghostly red strings exploded from Naruto and floated upwards. Naruto watched in shock as the strings kept coming from him. His eyes followed the strings upwards. Baka. Both Naruto and clone stared in disbelief as the image of a pink-haired girl floated in the sky. Even in another life, you still managed to find trouble. She winked. By the way, I got your message, brother. What is this? The clone yelled. He could feel his power draining. Several more images seemed to appear. Including one of Tsukino, who smiled at Naruto followed by a wish of luck. He looked on in awe as the sky was quickly being filled with images. Some even replaced the buildings. "We're proud of you." He turned to his left, and saw his parents standing there. Red strands attached to their hearts. "Mom. Dad. Where were you?" Naruto asked. In the sky, several images gasped in surprise. "We lost the connection, and couldn't locate you. Like a needle in a haystack." Kushina answered. "Then these red strings appeared, so we followed them here." Minato said with a Kakashi-type eye smile. With a smile, Naruto looked up. Around here were all the bonds he ever made. And what surprised him the most, was that he could actually feel their chakra. He looked around, and saw something. He looked past Tsunade, Ino and even Hinata, and nearly gasped as he saw a certain someone. "Idiot," Sasuke said with a smirk. "Getting tossed around by a clone." "Sasuke." Naruto whispered. "You should know by now, that bonds are unbreakable." "No matter how strong you try," Sasuke smirked, but whispered the last part. "Bonds can even last through time and space, even through the afterlife." The clone grunted and struggled to stand as the strings grew brighter. "That's right." Ino yelled. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement. "Our hearts will always be connected." Everyone yelled as one, including Naruto. The clone smiled as he fell to a knee. "Congratulations, you passed." The clone coughed. "My power is now your chi, use it well." With a final smile, he vanished into several blue tendrils which rushed toward Naruto. He braced himself as the tendrils suddenly impaled him. But instead of harming him, they flowed through him as if it was made of water. Once the final tendril was absorbed, Naruto flexed his claws. "Naruto." He turned towards the voice, and saw that the streets were filled with ghostly images of everyone he made a bond with. Sakura walked forward. "I know you can't come back, but I just wanted you to know." Her green eyes were filled with determination. "That will protect Konoha with all we've got." "Ditto." Ino piped up. She threw her arms around Sakura with her eyes closed, and a wide smile on her face. "Looks like it's time to go." Sai spoke up for the first time. Naruto didn't even notice him, but he did sort of form a bond with the boy. Everyone noticed that particles started floating from their bodies as if they were bubbles. I hope we will remember this when we wake up. Kakashi spoke up. His eyes met his former sensei's. Sakura shyly walked forward. But she had a happy smile on her face. She reached forward, and gently stroked Naruto's ear. She chuckled as it twitched. Naruto noticed a tear threatening to fall from her eyes. With a sniffle, Naruto embraced Sakura. His first true love, a love which she also returned, if a little too late. She was now his sister, and he wouldn't have it any other way. I hope we'll meet in another dream again, soon. Sakura spoke as she held Naruto tighter. Naruto was surprised he could feel her, and Sakura thought the same thing. His fur tickled her nose, and the fur was unbelievably comfortable. I want you to find your one true love in this world. If she treats you badly. She pulled back and looked at Naruto. She gently kissed his muzzle. Tell me, and I'll set her straight. Sakura backed away with another sniffle. As the hundreds of bonds Naruto made with begin to vanish, they each gave him a unique wave. Sasuke just shook his head with a grin. And to his surprise, Hinata rushed forward and gave him a quick hug. Naruto smiled as she backed away. She was very happy to see Naruto again, but sad this may be the last time. Naruto saw his other sister figure, Tsukino, walk forward. Stay out of trouble. He gave her a final embrace before she completely vanished. But before she vanished, Naruto said, no promises. And like usual, there is always one person that gives a final remark. See you later, Foxy. Anko spoke with a beaming grin. With a wink, she completely vanished. Naruto's sweat dropped at that. Real world. Panther leaned over a snoring Naruto. He held a bucket of cold water in his paws. He was just about to dump it on the sleeping fox, but before he could even tip the bucket, an explosion of chi sent the bucket rocketing backwards and onto Panther. Naruto yawned as he stood up. He stretched, and heard his back pop. His eyes scanned the room, and he took notice he was back in his own room. He continued to scan the room, and had to do a double take. MSTR? Naruto asked. He saw the short Panther standing there, with a bucket on his head and dripping wet. Said MSTR just turned away and silently walked out, leaving behind a trail of water and a confused pupil. Naruto sat before his MSTR in a meditation stance. The floor and walls were covered in stones, and an altar was near them. Behind the MSTR, lay a long object wrapped in cloth. I see. Panther spoke up after hearing what Naruto went through. Strange indeed. What was your experience like, MSTR? Naruto asked. As Panther thought about it, Naruto tried to sneak a peek at the wrapped object, but Panther's tail kept blocking it from view. Mine. Panther scratched his chin. Well. I had to fight an evil turkey, that strangely, had my mother's voice. Naruto sputtered. Seriously? Yep, put up quite a fight. Tasty too. Panther licked his chops. After a moment, he saw that Naruto was staring at him. He coughed. Congratulations on unlocking your chi. With practice, you might be able to do the moves that you used to do. Thanks. I can't believe that was the final test. Naruto yelled out in joy with a beaming smile. Who said that was the final test? Panther asked, which caused Naruto to freeze in his celebration, along with Minato and Kushina who just popped a bottle of champagne, or was it sake? But. Naruto stuttered. Panther gave a loud chortle, which only confused the young fox and his parents further. My young and strange pupil, you've passed the final test 2 years ago. Panther explained, still with a gleeful laugh. Naruto looked down. Images flashed through his head, and his eyes widened. I will never give up. Naruto yelled after he fell off the rock for the 10th time. I can't give up. Naruto yelled. He jumped over a pit of flames, and tried to avoid the rollers. Giving up. Naruto continued to try and fire an air bullet at the straw dummy. Means. I'm weak. Naruto flicked his eyes towards the smiling panther. You see, you're the only pupil I had that didn't quit within a few months. He stood up, and walked towards a line of pictures. He pointed at them with his cane. He pointed to a young Wolverine with spiky hair. He gave up after a day, and now he works on his family's farm. He moved the cane to a male tiger with blonde hair. Him. Gave up after a month, and now he's a fisherman. He pointed to a female whose face was blocked by the glare of the sun. All he could make out was a dark yellow fur, and what looked like long ears. Panther moved the cane and pointed to all the other pictures. You're the first pupil to not give up. That's true kung fu spirit. He whipped the cane forward and pointed it at Naruto. But, why do you fight? Why do you fight? Haku asked a younger Naruto. Is there somebody precious to you? Haku asked as he picked some herbs. When a person has something important they want to protect, that's when they can become truly strong. Haku's voice echoed around him. To protect the people I care about, to protect my bonds, to protect the weak. Naruto yelled with determination. Panther smiled. I'm glad that's the reason. Didn't want to bonk my star pupil on the head, now would I? He waved the cane threateningly. He reached behind his back, and pulled out the wrapped object. He gave it a lovingly pat, then thrusts into Naruto's waiting arms. I had it special made. Naruto had always loved to receive presents. During his younger days, it was a rare occasion. And he only got them from Anbu, the old man, or some of the veteran shinobis. But still, he loved to open them. He quickly unwrapped the cloth. Once the cloth was thrown off, he gasped. Inside his mindscape, Minato, focused on the gift, accidentally pulled to HRD on the cork and caused the thing to fly in every direction. Ignoring his mother's scream, he examined the gift. It was a gorgeous katana with a red hilt and orange wrappings around it. The sheath itself was orange with the picture of a fox standing over a village, as if protecting it. The color of the fox was red with the village being emerald green. Naruto gently rubbed it, but then took notice of the hilt for the first time. The hilt had a special design, where a paw can fit and grip it with ease. This is. He flipped the sword around and saw his name around the fox. Incredible. Come. Let's celebrate with a large dinner. The old panther popped his back as he stood. He turned to Naruto. But only a small amount of noodles. Naruto pouted, with his ears sagging, but he was inwardly happy, and wished his parents would share the sake. Meanwhile, in another village. People sat at the counter in a noodle restaurant. They were eating happily and chattering with each other. Puh! A medium-sized bear yelled. He pushed his bowl forward. Another bowl. Extra cheese, please. Puh quickly snatched the bowl. He was a fairly large panda, and the dragon warrior. One would wonder why he wasn't at the Jade Palace, or off saving someone. The answer is a simple one. Gotcha. But knock off the rhymes, will ya? Puh shook his head. He looked through the window that leads to the kitchen. Dad. One with extra cheese. Coming up. The goose, who was currently sweating up a storm, replied. Puh, today is the busiest day ever. We need some extra paws, claws and even hoofs. Extra paws? Puh asked. He ignored the bowl that landed on his head. A light bulb suddenly went off above his head. I know just the paws, guys to ask. 30 minutes later found Puh with a wide smile on his face as he stood before a gorgeous female tigress. She had orange fur and an unhappy expression on her face. Puh. She growled. She wanted to be anywhere, but here. What am I doing here? Please. Just help out a little. We'll even pay you. Pa paused as that left his lips. Eventually. Alright, fine. Seeing as how I owe you for everything. Saving the village, saving China. I'll help. Tigris crossed her arms. Hold still. Pa ordered as he examined the feline before him. Wadash, was all she managed to get out as Pa moved lightning fast. Not even 10 seconds later, he backed away with a smile. Perfect. Pa complimented as he put his paws in two L shapes and admired his work. Tigris looked down at herself. A white apron was draped over her. Pa. Tigris growled out once again. Ooh, almost forgot. He whipped out a small hat and gently placed it on her head. Tigris just stared at Pa. Her right eye twitched. Naruto swung his sword with an ease he didn't think was possible. When he first received the sword, he had trouble with it. Beyond trouble. The first time it actually slipped out of his paws, and almost decapitated his MSTR. The old panther took it well, by swngng the sword at his student. Naruto shivered slightly. He was glad he still had a healing factor. With his parents' ability to travel between his body and the afterlife, they discovered they also act as if they were Kyuubi. The combined chakra/chi between two former Jinchurikis and the yellow flash gave him tremendous reserves. He hoped soon he will be able to do the rasengan again. Or an air bullet/rasengan, he thought with a grin. He knew he would have to practice that one a lot just to make it happen. I give it 2 noodles out of 5, Minato commented. A better name is a must for any jutsu to succeed. Totally agree. Maybe have dragon in the name. Dragon always makes a jutsu sound and look better. Kushina joined her husband. Naruto could picture her nodding sagely. Dragon Ball. I like it. Minato replied, then rolled the name around on his tongue. Naruto just ignored his parents, and focused on the task at hand. He was currently surrounded by trees. Many had slashes on them. He was slightly out of breath, and his fur was matted with sweat. He slipped into the stance his mother taught him. His sword was poised to stab forward. Since he received the blade, his mother was like a drill sergeant. It was almost as if Ibiki was his sensei, or Anko. He knew his mother heard him. And with a growl that would probably scare any nearby critter, he leapt forward. And at the very last second, right as he neared the tree, he flicked his wrist. A slash appeared on the tree. Bark flew past his face as he appeared behind the tree. He quickly sheathed his blade into its sheath. He still loved the look of the sheath, and always felt so awesome with it showing proudly on his back. A fox protecting a village. What more could he ask for? He glanced to the sun. It's been 5 days since Panther told him and Sue the big news. Since receiving the sword, he made time each day to practice. Back in his world, he didn't even think of using a sword. His fist and clones were his lethal weapons. Beating the pulp out of people. His drill sergeant mother was like Yoda, only without riding on his back. Nah, that was Panther's job. The true Yoda. And the Panther really needed to trim his claws. Yoda, Panther entered the clearing where Naruto was. He raised a brow as he saw Sue staring intently at Naruto. He ignored that little everyday occurrence and walked up to his star pupil. But what he didn't count on was a sword heading straight for him. He blinked, and narrowed his eyes as his very last whisker fell off. This was almost like the time Naruto nearly took off his head when he first started using the sword. With quick reflexes, he caught the floating whisker. Naruto flinched. His shinobi instincts kicked in as he heard a footstep. But he relaxed as he saw Sue. She always managed to sneak up on him. No footsteps. No sound. almost like a ghost. Panther pocketed his fallen whisker. His beloved. Then before anyone could react, he whipped out his cane and poked Naruto in the stomach so strong even Naruto's parents flinched. He paused mid-second poke as a thought came to him. He remembered why he came up to Naruto. Earlier he had received a letter from his rival. He wouldn't exactly call Shifu an old friend, considered that he was way older than Shifu. Rivals sound better. They vowed to teach the best students, and rub it into the other's face. When he learned Shifu had trained a new breed of Furious 5, he tried to match that. But he failed. And now Shifu had sent word about his latest student. The Dragon Warrior. He already knew about that since a year ago, so he figured that Shifu finally remembered him. How he wanted to rub that little red panda's nose in a pile of. He shook his head. The warrior was just a panda. Albeit, a large panda. That's when an idea formed. An idea so deranged, he was forced to chuckle aloud. The idea could even benefit his rival. Maybe he could even set his student up with that tigres student of Shifu's. That would be great revenge against his student. The DMN fox, cut off his last whisker. Meh, that idea could backfire in a huge way. Panther looked at his student, better make that looked up at his student. He quickly placed his cane back down until it left an imprint in the dirt. He examined the fox from head to toe, which made Naruto quite uncomfortable. To him, it was like the times Tsunade gave him a physical. After a few more seconds, the panther nodded to himself. Alright, he aimed his cane at Su this time and hummed to himself. Get everything you need packed up. We leave soon. Su looked at the small kung fu mstr in confusion, but he had moved the cane onto Naruto again. I can't have your skills going to waste by being stuck in the same boring place every day, can we? A journey would do you good. He placed the cane back down. Naruto caught the shift of wind and he couldn't help but wonder how fast his mstr really was. His parents agreed completely. As Panther turned away, he looked back with a fanged smile. We shall leave for the Valley of Peace. Naruto panted. His tongue even poked from his lips, but he was quick to reel it back in. According to the sun, it was almost lunchtime and they still have at least 20 miles to go before reaching the Valley of Peace. He turned around to exit the clearing, but nearly suffered a heart attack. Su stood there with her head tilted. Ah. Sorry. She quickly realized what she did and apologized with a quick bow. Naruto may not have been the brightest in his world, but with his parents helping him every day, he learned a lot. Including when someone has skills. Several images flashed before Naruto's eyes. Naruto watched as Su tripped while carrying his beloved soup. She swerved over a curled-up rug and managed to catch the soup without a single drop being spilt. Naruto passed it off as rabbit reflexes. Naruto was practicing his throwing skills. Between his paw, he had a knife there. He was worried there wouldn't be any shuriken and kunai in this world, but he improvised, and made himself a set. They are slightly bigger than the ones from his world, but they get the job done. He raised his arm, the knife wiggled as he prepared it. But just as he threw it, his shoulder twitched. He watched in horror as the knife hurled towards the rabbit. He rushed forward, but knew he wouldn't get there in time. But out of everything he expected to happen, he didn't expect this. The rabbit turned faster than the shunshin, a body flicker, and snatched the object out of the air. His mouth dropped. And of course, there was the many times she snuck into the hot springs without making a wave, a sound or a splash. Then he remembered that picture he saw at the temple. A glare covered the face of the girl. You were his student, weren't you? Naruto asked as she began to walk away. She nearly tripped over her own feet. He sweat dropped. What? Su managed to ask as she turned away, only to see the fur above Naruto's eye raise. She sighed. I wanted to be like him. Strong. Brave. Ever since I was a child, I have been training to be that great. Naruto nodded. Panther may be old and small, but he could pack a punch. Especially if he's aggravated, which was most of the time. But Naruto could relate to her. He wanted to be great too, just like his father. But back then, he didn't know that his own hero would later turn out to be his father. The Yellow Flash. He still hoped to be great just like his father, even if he was in a new world. Unlike you, I gave up. I just couldn't handle it. Then she smiled, which surprised him. And that's when I discovered cooking. I found out I loved it, more than kung fu. She sighed. Not a sad one, but a happy one. Oh, seeing the smile on someone's face when they try my food. Words cannot describe it. Are you crying? Kushina spoke after a moment. And no. Something in my eye. Was Minato's reply. In your eye? We're in the Mindscape. Naruto placed a hand on the rabbit's shoulder. Back in my world, we had something called a cooking mean. They were supposed to cook for the squads, but that backfired. He chuckled, remembering his time dealing with them. You could use a similar idea. Use kung fu when you cook. I believe you have the skill for it. He started to walk away. Who knows, you may even be able to teach people to become a kung fu cook. He looked back, and gave her a smile. They were unaware of a pair of beady eyes watching them with a smile from a bush, but the lack of whiskers ruined the whole look. All right, the great Mstr Panther started to say as they left behind the small village they used to rest in. But this time, it was Sue that was smiling brightly. When they left their home, she was nervous. Naruto still didn't know why they had to leave their home. The only home he actually knew in this world. He was actually beginning to get comfortable there. But, as his Mstr said, a journey would do him good. As you may know by now, the dragon warrior is a panda. So. Both Naruto and Sue replied at the same time. Naruto had seen many types of ninja in his time, and he didn't see what the big deal was. Panther scratched his chin, then replied nonchalantly, I believe you are the true dragon warrior. Mstr. Naruto tilted his head. He didn't notice Sue freeze in her tracks as if expecting lightning to strike in front of her. Panther stopped walking. That's what I truly think. He turned so he saw his student's eye from the corner of his own. Who knows, maybe there may even be a fox warrior or phoenix warrior position for you. Naruto nodded. At first, he didn't understand the phoenix one, but then it dawned on him. It would be awesome if that was the case. I think Toad should somehow be involved in this whole scenario. His father piped up. That made Naruto wonder, was it possible? To summon. To actually cross worlds that way. He didn't know, but it would. Be amazing if he could. But, would Kami let it happen? If they want to believe the panda is the dragon warrior, then let them. He may very well be a chosen one. He looked Naruto dead in the eye. Or tried to. He looked up, only for the morning sun to block Naruto's face. Since you were a chosen one in your world, it may not be possible for a chosen one to be chosen twice. And with that, the Mstr turned around and began walking, all while pondering the mysteries of the chosen ones. What's up with him? Naruto whispered to Sue. He's pondering again, she replied as if it was a normal occurrence. She reached behind her head and began to tie her ears together with a ribbon. Just in case a fight comes up, her ears won't get in her way. Naruto wondered why she did that, but after finding out the truth, he understood. Sakura and Ino both did that at times. Will you still be able to do the sexy jutsu? Wipe that smile off your face. Naruto's ear twitched at that. But he had been wondering the same thing. He doubted it. The rasengan and the sexy jutsu are two completely different things. But he was willing to try. Before his thoughts can drift, Panther yelled out. Aha! Panther yelled from up ahead, then began to mumble, the fox shall be my secret weapon. The fox/phoenix warrior. A lady killer. Naruto blinked as he heard that. Naruto's hearing picked up everything, but it was best to make sure. Hey! What are you mumbling over there? Naruto yelled with his paw pointing at his MSTR's back. Panther chuckled, then called over his shoulder. Nothing you should worry about. That makes me even more worried. Naruto yelled as he ran after his MSTR. Sue just shook her head and followed at a more relaxed pace, still trying to get her ears tied together neatly. They were very close to the valley, with only a few miles to go. Naruto had decided to put himself on autopilot and enter his mind to ask a question that's been on his, mind. The world around him swirled and faded away, and as his eyes took in the area, he had to blink several more times. His parents stood there. It has been a while since he'd been to the Mindscape, and he guessed his parents decided to make it more homey. Didn't they have a heavenly paradise to go to? His father was on a sofa, while Kushina was browsing through books that lined the wall. He wondered how the books even got there, but figured that Kami was still helping him out in her own ways. He continued to look around, then he noticed something. It was almost an exact replica of the Hokage Tower. There was even a window. And outside, he could even see 5 familiar faces. But instead of a human appearance, they resembled the inhabitants of this world. The first Hokage resembled a lion, and so did the second. The third, which he smiled at, looked like a monkey. His father looked like a fox. And of course, Tsunade resembled some type of cat. Was going for a cheetah or a cougar, his father replied with a lazy wave. Glad to see ya. Minato stood with a stretch, and then froze as he looked at his son. Going closer, he examined him. You've done something different. Minato stroked his chin. Kushina cracked open a book, and raised a brow at her 2 boys. Your tail. He nodded to himself, while Naruto frowned. Even in his mind, his animal form was becoming natural. He knew he belonged here. With his parents, Sue, and that crazy short thing he calls MSTR. But he didn't expect his father to say what he did. It's more fluffier. Minato quickly grabbed the waving tail, then he squeezed and rubbed it while enjoying the fluffy feeling. Naruto's ear twitched as his father struck a sensitive spot. Seeing that, Kushina shook her head. She licked her finger, then flipped a page in her book. But after reading a few paragraphs, she decided to save her son from his idiot father. Quit rubbing your son. Minato quickly dropped Naruto's tail, and smiled innocently. What can we do for you? As she slid her book back into place, she spotted a purple notebook hidden between 2 books on the shelf. Naruto's ear twitched again as he straightened out his tail. After all, it wasn't that easy to get it fluffy. There is something that has been bothering me for a while now. Before he could continue, Minato grew a wide smile. Aha! The talk about girls. I have been preparing for this day. Minato then looked around at the books laying on the nearby table. He mumbled, now, where is that notebook? As he searched, he failed to see his wife walk over to him. She rolled the purple notebook up, reared her hand back, then brought it down on Minato's head. Itai. Looking for this, dear? Kushina asked with a raised brow. Her tone was neutral as she lifted up the purple notebook. But as she held it, it slipped open, and Naruto managed to get a good look of what was in it. A drawing of stick figures in compromising positions. Was that a pair of fox ears and tails on the one standing up, and a pair of bunny ears on the one bending over? His eyes widened, then a blush followed. Kushina slapped her husband once more with the book. I just wanted to give him the talk. The red-haired beauty ignored her husband's pout, and flipped through the book. So, this was what you were doing when you told me you were busy? A thought bubble appeared above Minato's head. An image swirled in it. One with Sue. Her melons were covered by steam. She leaned forward with her lips puckered, and just as she winked, the bubble popped. He's good inspiration. Naruto quickly wiped the blood that leaked from his muzzle. He didn't think of Sue that way, if anything, she was more like Sakura. Sure, he'd admit there was a little crush, but at the end of the day, he thought of her more like a sister. At least, he hoped he did. He coughed into his paw. Guys. Busy, my butt. He watched his mother stomp on his father. His ear twitched in annoyance. Wait a minute, when you were Hokage, and Jiraiya had that mission. Her eyes narrowed. A book miraculous got published in Konoha. Paperwork, my butt. Naruto sighed, but decided to finish saying what he came here for. When I first came to this world, how did I understand the language? Kushina paused mid-stomp, and shared a glance with her husband, who was seeing stars. That's what we were thinking as well. Minato jumped up and dusted himself off. Perhaps that goddess sent the info to your brain, and through yours, we gained the knowledge. She also supplied us with an infinite collection of books as well. The afterlife is grand. Naruto nodded. He also thought of that. Even when he saw all of his friends, they understood him. It still feels like a foreign language to me, but at the same time, it also feels natural. Kushina tapped her chin with her finger. That's because your mind is still used to the shinobi world, hence the likely reason how you talk to everyone in that dream. Naruto scratched his ear. They talk about that dream a lot. He believed it really happened, and he knew that in the shinobi world, they realized that too. Minato still wished he had enough time to chat with Kakashi. That wasn't the only thing that I came here for. Minato leaned forward to whisper, is it about that collection of Ika Kami sent me? Feel free, son. Kushina's eye twitched at that. What is it, Naruto? Just wondering, since I learned to embrace what I am. His ears plopped down, which caused Kushina to smile at the cuteness. Why don't you two become my real parents? Tail and all. They both frowned at first, but then it dawned on them. He wanted them to become more like him. Their human forms have started to become strange and dare they say it, distant to him. All right. Kushina said with a smile. Both of his parents closed their eyes, and even he was forced to shield his as a bright light engulfed the area. He held his paws over his eyes for several seconds. After what felt like minutes, he decided to peek through his paws, and what he saw made him gasp. His mother. He always thought she was appealing, but now, it was even more so. Her red fur sparkled in the artificial sunlight that dripped through the window. She had a fanged smirk, which was similar to his own. And her ocean blue eyes sparkled with happiness. Perhaps having her family together again had something to do with it. No, he was positive that was the answer. He turned to his father, who had a lopsided smirk, with his tongue hanging out. Once again, it resembled his own. And the same could be said for the fur, which also resembled Naruto's. A bright yellow. His snout was darker, almost a brown color. His blue eyes held a hint of mischief when he glanced over at Kushina. Her reddish-brown tail swished back and forth, and those eyes followed the movement. Naruto just smiled. Now they resembled a family. If only they could be in the real world with him. He felt moisture swell up in his eyes, then a thought came up. It was already like they were right there. Never leaving him, and always by his side. Chastising him if he did something wrong. Teaching him their skills and other stuff he missed out on. Son, his father spoke, finally managing to tear his eyes from Kushina's tail. We will always be here. Never again will we leave you. Naruto. We're here. Sue's yell echoed around the room. Kushina smiled when she thought of the girl. Sure, She wouldn't mind if her and her son dated, but she could understand that he thought of her as the sister he never had, despite the advances Sue unknowingly makes every now and then. Get out there, kick some butt and take names. Minato yelled out with a fanged smirk, which Naruto mimicked. Coming into his mindscape actually made him feel a lot better, well, until his mother yelled out her contribution. And don't forget to find a girl. Naruto only blushed. It reminded him of what Sakura told him. Find your one true love in this world. He had to wonder, what was up with people trying to get him a girlfriend? Like that would ever happen. He had so much he wanted to do in this world. It was a new adventure and well, what happens, happens. Before he vanished, he saw his father wink at him. It was his way of saying what Kushina just said, only with a more perverted meaning. Coming back to his senses, he saw their destination. It was a fairly large village surrounded by mountains. According to his MSTR, the valley was surrounded by large mountains which helped protect it. The village appeared to be much bigger than Konoha and the village he stayed out when he first arrived in this world. And the mountains, there was hardly any like them in his world. And further up ahead, he saw a large temple. Swirls appeared in his eyes as he saw all the steps that lead up to it. Like hell he would ever climb that. Whoa, that would give someone a workout. Minato whistled. Yeah. Bushy brows would love that. Naruto frowned. During that test, he was so stunned to see everyone, that he didn't say anything to Gaara or Tsunade. He noticed both were there and he saw the tears. Hopefully the goddess will let him visit one of his friends again. Soon. Once the three travelers entered the village inside the Valley of Peace, two of the three were awestruck as the sounds and smells entered their senses. The village of Yang was just a peaceful farming place. A lone blacksmith, and some farmers, and that was it. Perhaps a few wandering swordsmen and the occasional kung fu traveler stopped at the village to relax for a few days. Not that they're complaining. But when these new smells struck them, it felt strange, but amazing. From flowers to food. Naruto was in heaven. Pure bliss. This place reminded him of Konoha. The smells. The sounds. Everything about it, except that there were no humans. He flicked his eyes around the village, and paused on several small rabbit children. They ran around the three all while laughing. He smiled. What do you think? Panther decided to ask after a moment of walking. The children ran off, but Naruto enjoyed watching them play kung fu. It reminded him of the game he used to play. Ninja. Lovely. Sue whispered in awe. Her eyes looked left, right, up and even down. She chuckled nervously as she almost stepped on some of the tinier beings. It wasn't really the buildings that made her look in awe, but everything else. The scenery was breathtaking, the streets were filled with people, and the unforgettable smells. She chuckled as her thoughts kept going back to the smells. I wonder what type of food they have. We're being followed, Kushina announced. Naruto nodded. His eyes caught sight of a figure behind them jumping around obstacles and people like a monkey. I agree. Makes me, kinda homesick. Konoha? Panther asked with a glance to his pupil. That, and our temple. Mostly the temple though. Naruto answered. Sue watched and studied his face. He was looking around at every movement in awe. His nose wrinkled at the smells. His ears twitched from the sounds. And his tongue poked out several times as if to taste the air. A soft smile grew on her face as she thought the same thing. This could be a fun place to stay. Nearby, a ghostly trail weaved and snaked through the citizens. Naruto's nose twitched as the smell entered his senses. It had a certain aroma to it. His stomach growled, which sounded more like a roar. Several people nearby were startled by it. He hadn't eaten in what felt like days. Well, Sue did cook some noodles when they camped out before reaching the valley. But that felt so long ago. He adjusted the backpack on his back. He was so excited about the whole journey, he forgot that he was pretty much carrying everyone's stuff. Su he could understand, but his MSTR. He shook the thought from his head, and glanced around for the source of the aroma. And then, it was as if he had a dijitsu. A white trail leading from his nose, all the way to its origin. A shop in the distance. A smile graced his muzzle, but for those watching, the glistening fangs made them turn white as a ghost. Ah, the Jade Palace. Panther mumbled as he stopped walking. His eyes narrowed. Shifu. MSTR. Su tapped his shoulder as the small animal started to laugh. Oh, right. He shook his head, then cleared his throat. They were in the market area, and he could smell all kinds of food. He was practically salivating at the mouth. All right. We should get something to eat first. He looked around the market for a good place they could eat. Nearby was a shop that looked like a fish place. He continued to drool, but then shook his head. He should probably tell Naruto that this will be their new home for a while. Now, listen, Naruto. He turned to his student, only to see an outline of where he stood. Huh? Su turned her head every which way. The movement was like a white blur. Wadash. Where did he go? He did the same thing at the last village. Panther sniffed the air, and when a certain scent wafted through his nose, he immediately knew. Noodles. He sighed. The scent was overpowering. Let him be. For now at least. He turned back around and started to head for the fish place. Hopefully that kid will stay out of trouble. If you say so, whispered Su. She knew Naruto's stomach had a tendency to get him into trouble. She remembered one time he smelled something delicious while he was in the middle of an obstacle course, and he caused everything to somehow explode on his quest for the source. Meanwhile, inside of Mr. Ping's noodle shop, well, it was now called Dragon Warrior Noodles and Tofu. The place was pretty packed. It was usually slow, but today was special. Or make that, this week was. It was a festival week, and visitors from all over were swarming. Pa stood with a wide smile as he watched his customers. It seemed like every week that they had a festival. And he really enjoyed the Dragon Warrior Festival. A festival made just for him. But this festival was the Firefly Festival. It was only the beginning of the festival, but towards the end, hundreds of fireflies will light up the skies. Swee! Pa started to yell. In his paws were a stack of bowls. As he swerved around the customers, the stack wobbled. But when he made his way to the kitchen, his yell slowed to a crawl. His eyes saw a figure there. Tigres. She was in an apron, and on her face was a very bored look. Eet. Oh, Tigres. You look. He tossed several words around his mouth. Okay. Scary beyond anything imaginable. Cute. The left eye of the feline twitched. Nice. What's up? Hurry, hurry. Mr. Ping pushed past the two. A growl left Tigris' throat as her head met the ceiling. The place was small, after all. Ping grabbed a bowl from the counter and shoved it at the female tiger. Number 5 needs his order. Go, go. Fine. Tigris grabbed the bowl, only to see Pa still smiling widely. Him and that smile. If he wasn't the dragon warrior, she would extract her claws and let loose. But instead, she ducked her head and made her way outside. It was still packed, but not nearly as crowded as it was. She made a mental note to slap Pa anyway. I should be training not, she sighed, waiting tables. She set the bowl of noodles onto a table, and watched in disgust as the goose that ordered it slurp and slurp. Not that she hasn't seen her fair share of table manners at the Jade Palace. Even Monkey ate like a pig. She was about to head back in to pick up another order, when she saw Po walk out. His arms were extended, and 5 bowls were balanced on each limb. And before she could blink, he slung each one upwards while that smile on his face grew wide. She was surprised the contents of the bowls didn't spill as they came down. Before they could hit the ground, Po whipped around and kicked the bowls back upwards. The bowls flew high as Po kicked several more times. He was gently not to kick too strong, it was more like a tap. Her eyes caught his fast movements as he grabbed a bowl from midair and placed it before each customer. She smiled, well, an internal one. Po decided to make a boring job into an interesting training exercise. And without another thought, she placed the bowl onto the customer's table and headed back to the kitchen. Like hell she would do what Po was doing. "1 bowl, please," she heard from the counter. From the corner of her eyes, she saw the customer, but paid no mind. "Here for the festival?" Mr. Ping asked as he poured the customer a bowl of noodles. It was rare that someone sat at the counter, but he didn't mind. He enjoyed the company. The figure's ear twitched as Mr. Ping placed the bowl before him. "Festival? Oh, something like that." Naruto answered with a fanged smirk as he saw the bowl of noodles. As soon as Mr. Ping placed the chopsticks down, Naruto had grabbed them. Ping's mouth dropped as he saw the young fox dig into the noodles. He chuckled sheepishly as it reminded him of a certain dragon warrior. Deciding to tend to other customers, he poured another bowl, only for the fox to yell out, "More please." He blinked, then rubbed his eyes as he saw the empty bowl. Did he even use the chopsticks? Without thinking, he moved the bowl in front of the customer, only to watch him dig in with lightning speed. He was even forced to wipe the juice that splashed onto his face. "Mr. Ping. Where is the bowl for table 2? Tigres asked as she walked through the kitchen, careful not to bump her head again. Ping looked at her confused, then looked at the bowl on the counter that was now almost empty, then back to Tigres, then back to the fox, then back down to the bowl. His eyes widened. Tigres also saw the customer, but her eyes were on the blade on his back, under the backpack. Naruto slurped the last noodle. He was unaware that he was being stared at, instead, he was savoring that noodle. It was different than Sue's. It had a certain spice that he couldn't determine, but it didn't matter. It was still delicious. He debated if he should ask for another one. Go for it. Minato told him, but his mother on the other hand. Boys. She whispered, but she was completely alert. Looking for potential threats, and potential dates for her son. Her eyes immediately went to the waitress. Tigres analyzed the fox as Mr. Ping placed another bowl before him. His ear twitched at every movement. But unfortunately, she didn't have time to study him. Mstr Tigres. A customer called, which snapped the feline out of analyzing the fox. Puh. Tigres said once she took the order from the customer. What do you think? She nodded to the counter, where Mr. Ping was chatting away with the customer. About my dad. Puh scratched his head. Well, he is a tad bossy. I remember one time when dash. No, the customer. Idiot. Tigres tried not to yell, or bare her fangs, lest she scare the customers. The fox wasn't normal, that much she could tell. And what was with the blade? Maybe she was just being paranoid. It was a festival week, and many travelers probably had weapons. She didn't see the fox's ear twitch as they talked. Maybe a carpenter. Puh answered with a shrug. They've been known to carry, swords. Tigres just looked at him. A carpenter? She looked back at the customer and noticed there was a growing stack of bowls. She glanced upwards, and saw Monkey there, staring at the target of her interest. We should find out. I'm not attacking any customers. Several eyes turned to Puh. He chuckled nervously. I promise Dad. Where are you putting all that? Mr. Ping asked, placing another bowl down, only to watch the young fox slurp it all up. Naruto rubbed the back of his head. Everyone seemed to ask him that. So, the Jade Palace is the one with the steps. He hoped to avoid climbing those stairs. It's like they lead to the heavens. That's right, Pa said as he entered the kitchen, and gently pushed his father to the side. I live there, and he finally noticed the bowls stacked up. T12. Ping pushed his son away this time, then dusted himself off. Looks like he's a few away from breaking your record. Naruto placed some money on the counter. Luckily, he got paid to do a few odd jobs since he came to this world. From finding lost things to helping build a house. And then there was the times he got tricked into babysitting. He hoped to never deal with that again. He swiveled around on the stool, only for his nose to hit something strong. Well, it was both strong and soft. He blinked and took a glance upwards, into the orange eyes of the waitress. Her eye twitched. Ah, Naruto. Meet Tigres. Ping managed to introduce. He was the only one to ask for Naruto's name, so Po was confused about the name at first. Then they heard the unsheathing of claws. Her wings unfurled. Her red eyes were filled with mirth. Her pointed ears twitched at every little sound. For sharp fangs poked from her lips, 2 on top, 2 on the bottom. Her fur was a gorgeous purple. There was a reason she was called the most appealing, and most deadly, in the region. To her gang anyway. But if she had her way, and she will, the entirety of China will know her name. Bienfu, they would chant. Her beauty would be the envy of China, and every female would want to be her, men would die at her feet. Her smile could destroy the sun in a brightness contest. Her wings could create hurricanes. And the glint in her eyes could stop a person's heart. She was the leader of the Bienfu clan. It was a work-in-progress name. It sounded better than the vampire clan some people have tended to call them. They were a clan, more of a gang, of the toughest bats in all of China. A clan of. A sudden scream ripped through the cave, and to her ears, it sounded like an explosion. Her red eyes were filled with annoyance. She fell out of the cave again. She didn't have to look around the darkness to know who it was. And she's not flapping her wings. She was upset that the usual occurrence that seemed to go on around her interrupted her thoughts of beauty. With a snap of her finger, the bat flew by her in a red blur, on a mission to rescue his comrade. Lady Bienfu, a calm voice entered her ears. Typhoon and I have scouted the area. We are just outside the valley. Bienfu smirked. The cave was dark, and she stood in the only place where the light shone. Like an angel with a halo. They travel at night, and it was very strong to tell how close they were to their destination. Take Hua and Shui with you, she commanded, but as he turned around, she had one final thing to say. Dichio, make sure they don't start anything. We don't want to face the Furious Five just yet. His green eyes sparkled in the darkness before he faded away. Bienfu just stared out the cave. From where the cave was, she could see over the mountains. It's been a while. Panther bit into a nicely cooked salmon, that looked a tad raw. Nearby, Sue wrinkled her nose at the smell. She couldn't stand the smell of fish. Bring on the vegetables, especially carrots, any day. Delicious, she thought as she bit into her own dish. Steam flowed upwards and into her nostrils. She hated the fact that the fish stench interfered with it, but she fought it. She had to clean and cook the fish that Naruto and Panther caught. It was disgusting, and she hoped that the fishes couldn't talk. As Panther bit into half of the fish head, the fish's lone eye watched her. Pleading. Survival of the fittest, she guessed. Survival of the weirdest is more like it. She bit into a steamed carrot, and enjoyed the taste. Steam escaped her mouth when she opened it. Her ear twitched as she heard something. Something familiar. Did you hear that? Panther looked up. The lone eye of the fish was tucked between two of his teeth. Sue turned a shade of green, which almost matched her green eyes. What does the fox say, indeed? The popping sound that followed didn't help much. She felt the carrot come up, and her eyes threatened to roll back into her head. Don't those cooks properly clean their food? Like, cut off the heads first. Remove the eyes. She swallowed the bile that lingered in her throat. Why do you say that? Because it's Naruto. You tell him to stay out of trouble, he finds himself in it. You say sit, he stands. Don't get in the trash, he finds himself neck deep in it. Keep out of your personal stuff, and he dash. I get it, I get it. Sue looked out into the street. No fire or angry mob. That's good, right? I hope he stays out of trouble. We just got here after all. If he doesn't, it was nice knowing him, Panther said, chewing on another eyeball. Her cheeks grew green. We should head to the palace. I'm sure the kit can sniff us out. After that food, I'm positive of that, she once again swallowed the bad taste that came up. Oh, yeah, that felt real good. Naruto thought. 3 claw marks line his face, but they were healing fairly quickly. What's up with females? He pretty much screamed. Several of the civilians, mainly male, but also a few females, shared his sentiment by nodding in agreement. I beg your pardon? Kushina asked, only to get ignored. Not like she had anything there in the first place. He rubbed his face. Pretty soon, flawless skin and fur would be there, with no sign he was ever scratched. Welcome to my world, son. Welcome to my world. He didn't need to see his father to know that the man was nodding sagely. And what is that supposed to mean? Naruto adjusted his backpack. He honestly didn't know where he was supposed to go. He didn't even know the purpose of arriving in the village. So, where was he supposed to go? His ears twitched, and his nose wrinkled. Fish. But the noise inside his head caused him to lose focus. Sure, he could cut them off, but the thought of being alone scared him more than anything. He sniffed the air again, and caught the smell. He felt weird for using his sense of smell to find his MSTR, but seeing that there wasn't much else he could do, he followed the trail. Nearby, 3 figures stood atop a building. Dichio stared out over the sea of people, in both disgust and wonder. His green eyes were bright, and his brown fur shone in the sun. His wings spread wide, and he was very tempted to just soar above it all. Aye. The stutter from Shuei made his wings deflate, and his eyes to loose their bright edge. Spit it out. Hui yelled, his blue eyes looked like blue flames. His red fur stood on end, like he was ready and eager to fight. Not that Dichio felt any different. He wanted someone to start something, but he was the calm one in the group. I see the palace. Shuei said. Several people below them jumped from the sudden yell. Her orange eyes sparkled. He didn't understand why. After her yell, she quickly tried to dust off her blue fur, as if yelling must up something. Of course, the palace was strong to miss. They could easily infiltrate the place, have a party, then be gone before anyone noticed. But they were scouts. Observe and report. Shifu bounded through the halls of the Jade Palace, which was as quiet as a mouse. The sounds of fighting and explosions, and arguing, were gone. It was music to his ears. The Furious 5 were roaming around the city instead of training, so was Po. And he was trapped in the Jade Palace, like a knight to watch over a precious princess, which was the city. But the reason for his bound? And that fanged smirk? He was literally prancing around, he was tempted to just run around NDE. MSTR Monkey just informed him of an old friend that just wandered into town. He was expecting him soon, but it was sooner than he expected. The old goat probably thought he was going to surprise him. They were old friends, each had a different MSTR. Rivals, one could say. He wondered what this whole visit was all about anyway. About the dragon warrior being a panda. He was glad said panda wasn't around to see him with a skip in his step. He would never let him live that down. Good old Jade Palace. Been here more than a few times. He paused. The voice was coming from the main room. Not much Jade, and the steps are a killer for my back. MSTR. The female voice sounded exasperated. Shifu knew that dealing with the panther could be exhausting, so he smirked. Should call it Steep Palace. Or maybe Light Green Palace. Shifu felt a twitch in his eye. Jade is green, but I don't think dash. Green. I always thought Jade meant blue. Shifu then heard a clang. MSTR, don't do that. His eye twitched, even more hectic. Deciding to greet his guests, he strolled into the large room. Large pillars stood in a line, going from the entrance to the moon pool. The Hall of Warriors. And just like he suspected, the old panther was banging his cane against one of the pillars. Despite the twitch in his eye, he was still happy. It really hasn't been that long since he saw him. They do occasionally get together to play games. Mahjong, cards, anything that they could one-up each other on. But every time, the mysterious student of Panthers was absent. I presume you're not here for the festival. So, what do I owe the visit? Shifu asked. A game of Mahjong, perhaps? I'm sure I can find 2 other people. The girl, Sue, if you remember right, jumped out of her skin once he spoke. It was charming, if it wasn't for that slight twitch in her muscles, indicating she was prepared for a fight. We should get our students together. Him, versus your 6. Shifu was aware that Panther would be arriving once his students' training was complete. Was he that cocky? Or did he truly believe his student, of only 2 years, could defeat the furious 5+ Po? He needs to see other places. As do I. Maybe later, Panther replied, finally placing his cane back down. We have some unfinished business. I see. Then, shall I call for my students? Shifu said, but was surprised when the panther brushed past him. Their eyes met. There was something in Panther's eyes when he said that. Shifu called, but the panther had already left the area. As if reading his mind, Sue shook her head. He still has cobwebs up there, she said. Shifu just smiled, and indicated to Sue that they should follow him. Who knows what that old goat will get into? At least an hour or 2 had passed since the fateful meeting with a pair of claws. His face still stung, as if the pain was a mark for death. The fish trail had faded, which he blamed on the other smells that permeated the area. It made his stomach grow, which sounded like a ferocious beast to the smaller creatures around him. After using his stealth to make sure the fierce feline wasn't around, he entered Mr. Ping's place again. Ah, healing quite nicely. You sure make one heck of a first impression, Mr. Ping said, already preparing a bowl of steaming noodles. Some first impression, he thought with a grimace. It's not like he would run into her again, right? She was just a waitress, after all. While he ate, he also decided to experiment with Mr. Ping's new items. One item was called Dragon Fire. Noodles with green leaves sprinkled around it, and some orange sauce, which Mr. Ping said was a secret. After eating that, he literally blew flames from his mouth. Then he was quick to say, more. After eating his fill, and burping up flames, he decided to ask Mr. Ping about the Jade Palace, only for the restaurant owner to point in a direction over his shoulder. From his spot on the stool, he saw the palace. He saw it earlier, but just passed it off as some royal house or something. He really should have paid attention to Sue when she explained things. Meet us here, Sue had pointed to a homemade map of the valley. He remembered seeing a deep red circle mark around a castle-looking scribble, which had, here, above the circle. He admitted, he was never good with directions, but found he was great at tracking with his senses. He could find a restaurant in the middle of the desert. After saying adieu, he found himself at the steps that lead to the Jade Palace. The more he stared, the more it seemed to get further and further away. He rubbed his wounded face, the scratches seemed to burn as his eyes locked onto the palace. "Dear Kami," Naruto gulped. It was like something used for training taijutsu in the ninja world. Slowly, he placed his right foot on the first step. Exhaustion and fatigue was quick to engulf him. Could be that extra spicy noodles you had not more than 5 minutes ago. She had a point. Eating that dragon fire entree consumed most of his energy. Maybe he should head back and grab something to. No. I can do this. He placed another foot on the step of the stairway to heaven. First 2 steps. No problem. 10 steps. His tongue plopped out. 30. His knees quaked. At 60, he was on all fours. Maybe this was what that teacher of yours trained you for. Not helping, Dad, Naruto forced himself to stand. He could have sworn a praying mantis leapt by. Even the insects were mocking him. The mist in the air that stuck to his fur like glue actually felt good, and refreshing. Glancing further ahead, he could see the Jade Palace getting closer by the second. Panther refused to tell him why they had to journey to this place. Every time he asked, he would say that as a kung fu artist, he needed to see different places. Not in those exact words, but it was a fair translation. The closer he got to the gates, his sore cheek started to burn again. It was as if the palace was on fire, and he was walking into it. A brilliant green flame sprung to life over the palace. And as soon as he rubbed his eye, it vanished. He rubbed his cheek. Mstr Tigris stood stoic. Her face was set in stone. If one would ask her if she ever smiled, "I am smiling," would be her response. But at the moment, she was confused. The furious 5+ Po were standing in the training area, staring at the entrance to the palace. Shifu called for them, for reasons she didn't understand. Was it another training exercise? A spar with Po? That last one reminded her of something. With lightning-fast speed, she slapped the nearest person. Po. He winced in pain, and was quick to rub his reddened cheek. Ow! What was that for? Po asked, but it sounded more like a whine. For making me serve food, she replied. And the apron, Monkey chimed in. Tigris wondered why she was the one to be talked into serving. Was it because she had a soft spot for the panda? Viper and Monkey were the more qualified ones in the line. She can also scare those that refuse to pay, Po said, nodding sagely. A twitch grew in her right eye, uncontrollable. The soft spot she had for the panda was now history. She glanced around the area. Shifu hadn't came out yet, he just told them to wait. Which was odd. To her right stood Po. To her left was Viper. Next to her was Monkey. Next to Po was Crane with Mantis perched on his head. Finally, after an hour of waiting, Shifu walked out of the palace, and looked down at them. He was calm, but he also appeared to be aggravated, or was he happy? He was like a father to her, and she knew what every subtle movement of his meant. The slight twitch around the eye, his ear moving ever so slightly, and his nose wrinkling. He was definitely bothered. I would like to introduce an old friend of mine. Mstr Panther. As he said that, an older figure walked out, and examined them. Like a predator looking at vulnerable prey. And his assistant, Su. Po suddenly went rigid as he stared up at the three. But Tigris didn't pay him any heed. Panther, she tossed that name in her head. She remembered that a friend of Uguay's trained a panther. He was very promising, so much so that Uguay wanted to train him. From what she read in the old scrolls, he was very fast. Could vanish one moment, and appear right next to you. A very dangerous ability. Shifu mentioned him a few Times when he left the valley on a private matter. He always refused to let her, or the others, accompany him. They will be staying here for a while. There is one more, which should be arriving soon. Shifu said, looking over to Panther, who nodded. Panther's student. He is the reason they journeyed to our lovely valley. He. Tigris mumbled, glancing around. Speak of the devil, just as soon as those words left Mstr Panther's mouth, the gate to the Jade Palace was pushed open. She caught the fong smirk he was now sporting. The rabbit, Sue, only shook her head. When the figure entered the training area, she should have been surprised, but she wasn't. The fox she met earlier stood there, or tried to. He crashed onto his knees and began kissing the ground, only to spit out dirt. She also took notice of the marks on his face, they were hardly noticeable. Finally, the fox screamed. Naruto. That was the name Mr. Ping said he was called. The fox seemed to notice her. She didn't realize she had extended her claws, which made him flinch. Naruto Uzumaki. Mstr Fox. Shifu asked. Anyway, glad of you to join us. Mstr Fox. Panther mumbled, then shook his head in disgust. I'm sure he is destined for a better title. Mstr Maelstrom. I like that. Sue, what about Mstr Vortex? My two picks are Mstr Fickle and Mstr Fluffy, Sue replied with a giggle. You're whispering pretty loudly, Naruto mumbled from his spot on the ground. Shifu ignored that and settled for introductions. Mstr Naruto, Tigris figured Shifu didn't know what to call him. I like you to meet the Furious Five. With each name, they did a pose. Naruto did manage a smile, until the name came upon the one glaring at him. Her eyes burned with 1,000 flames. Not even she knew why she was glaring, but there was just something about him. An Mstr Tigris. Shifu seemed taken aback by the fierce look. We've met, she managed to say, not breaking eye contact. Shifu took a step back as flames seemed to erupt from her. And last, Shifu announced, then reluctantly said the last part. The Dragon Warrior. Tigris expected to hear screams of, the amazing, awesome, Dragon Warrior. But not a sound came from next to her. She finally broke eye contact with the fox, only to see staring straight ahead. Eyes glossy. Cheeks reddened. Mantis said, leaping on the panda's shoulder. He messed with his friend's face, only for it to act like silly putty. I think he stopped breathing, Crane said, prodding Po's stomach with his foot. Appealing, Po whispered after the fourth prod. Me? Wow, I don't know how to respond to that, Mantis said. He pulled on Po's eyelids, but didn't get a response. Who's she? Po asked, in a dreamlike tone. The group saw what he was staring at. The female rabbit. Her hair was tied back. She shuffled her feet back and forth, possibly in a nervous or bored manner. She smiled their way when she caught them staring. She went back to talking to Panther about possible names for Naruto. I find it weird I can't find a pulse on Po, Crane said. Anybody? Tigris only shook her head, and turned toward the fox, only to find an empty spot. She felt tension in her muscles. It was like his very presence caused every muscle in her body to act up. She calmed herself, or tried to. She still didn't know why, maybe it's because the fox touched a sensitive spot. Sure, she got punched, kicked and stabbed there, but the way he did it. That's Sue, Naruto spoke. Tigris didn't make an outward movement, but her eyes widened a small margin. The only real evidence of surprise. Seriously guys, where's his pulse? Crane said, astonished. Sue. Po whispered. Naruto glanced at him with a fanged grin, which vanished when he saw Tigris. She was the same size as the fox, but she did her best to act bigger. And from Naruto's pale face, she was succeeding. But inside her body, her heart pounded. She just passed it off as adrenaline. I just wanted to say, sorry about bumping into you, Naruto said. I didn't really feel anything, so dash. Son. Her right eye twitched, but before she could swipe, Shifu coughed to get their attention. Panther stepped forward, a smirk on his muzzle. Tigris honestly didn't know what to think of him. Was he really Shifu's rival? And on another matter, was the fox before her any good as well? Her heart pounded as she found herself wanting to test him. Glad to see you're making friends. Now, if you can snag a girlfriend, I'll be proud. Right now, my proudness meter is at 3. Panther shook his head. Entrance is everything. Presentation is another. Naruto's ears dropped. Tigris continued to examine him. He had a backpack and a sword strapped to his back. Clothing looked like they need a wash, and maybe tossed into a fire to clean the noodle splotches. We have a bunch of room available. I'll get 3 ready for you, she heard Shifu tell their guests. And for some reason, having them stay in the same living quarters felt funny. She fought strong warriors, like Tailung, but this felt different. She wondered if it had to do with her aggravation at Pa, and she wanted to let that anger out at somebody else. Yeah, that had to be it. High above the Jade Palace, where the fog was thick, 3 figures flew high. What say we stir up something? Hua said, his fur bristled with excitement. What did you have in mind? Dichio asked. Instead of an answer, Hua smirked. Shuei meanwhile was lost in thought as she stared at the group down below in the Jade Palace. As her 2 partners did a swan dive through the fog, she was left alone. Watching the group below talk and babble amongst themselves, she couldn't help but to smile. Have you used that blade? Tigris asked. The group made their way through the Jade Palace, and to the barracks. In an actual fight. Naruto paused at that. In a fight? No. He couldn't even summon clones, yet at least. And when he ran into a bandit, he just used kung fu to take care of them. He hated for everyone to think the sword was just for show. Some trophy that hasn't clashed with another of its kind. He couldn't explain it, but every once in a while, his paw subconsciously grips the handle. Haven't had a chance, he replied, but she just brushed by him and headed to what he assumed was her room. What's her problem? The real question is, what isn't her problem? Monkey laughed, leaping next to Naruto. It just takes a while for her to warm up, Crane said, then mumbled, like 3 years. You have a way with first impressions, his mother's voice echoed around his head. Naruto? Sounds foreign. Viper said, rolling the name around. Normally, Naruto's first reaction to a snake is to, well, pretty much scream and yell some fighting words. But in his time in the New World, he ran into a bunch of snakes. When one first spoke to him, he turned white, and fled. He always felt bad thinking back to that moment. The snake was a female, around his age, and it turned out she had a slight crush on him. Luckily, she understood. He told her he was from a foreign land, and she was the first snake he'd seen. She was ecstatic that she was the first of her kind to be seen by him. He did wonder how she's been since he saw her last. He took notice that Tigris peeked out from her room. Dread filled his very being. He did say he was sorry, so why was she being so craggy? If she was busty, like Sue, or Tsunade, he'd understand her anger. Son, please, for the love of Kami, abort that thought. Minato pleaded, but Naruto tuned him out. Naruto was unaware that he was currently producing images of a busted Tsunade and Sue in his head. My home, well, old home, is far, very far away. Everything is actually pretty new to me. Naruto lied. He saw Tigris briefly look away and stiffen in her doorway. That wasn't really a lie, just a slight stretch. Everything really was still new to him. Panther was nice enough to teach me his trade. And he brought you here as a test. Tigres said, stepping out into the hall. It wasn't a question, but more of a fact. To fight us. Naruto thought about that. It seemed both logical and troublesome. It was only right for Panther to want to show up Shifu. Troublesome. Good luck, Tigres said, before vanishing back into her room. After being shown his room, the group all went their separate ways. His room was small, but appeared to be comfy. There was a window, which had a gorgeous view of the valley. He hoped there was a pond or something he could bathe in. The mist in the air did indicate that a water source happened to be nearby. He placed his backpack on the floor, and dove into the bed. But he found it slightly strong to fall asleep, despite his eyes drooping. Darkness fell quickly, and he could already hear snoring next door. It was either Sue or Panther, he knew both snored, and they both had rooms next to him. He wished he could take a bath or something, his fur was starting to stick to the bed. He locked his paws together and stared at the ceiling. Before he eventually fell asleep, he had one thought. He vowed to make Tigres come around to him. He hated when people hated him for no real reason. Well, I wouldn't call that no real reason. His mother was the last voice he heard before dreams of ramen, and claws plagued his sleep. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more such crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Karasu87 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.